After dissecting the entire map, every rule, every restriction, every modern limitation, we discovered something almost impossible. Out of more than 3 million square miles and 3,143 counties, only 5 survived the full set of elimination filters. Just 5. What eliminated the other 3,138? The real filters. No codes, no zoning, no permit system, low taxation, realistic access to water, and land that isn't blocked by endless regulations. And that's where the mystery begins. Because these 5 counties didn't survive for the same reason, and they don't offer the same kind of freedom. One escaped regulation by population, another by distance, another by law, another by structure, another by geography. 5 different stories, all leading to the same outcome. Places where the modern rulebook never fully arrived.
The first county that survived all the filters sits in Texas, and it didn't survive by accident. The place is so unknown that most Texans couldn't point to it on a map, and yet it's one of the last locations in the country where the rulebook never took hold. That name is Loving County. It covers more than 600 square miles of open West Texas land, yet fewer than 100 people live here, a population too small to support any regulatory structure, which is exactly why the modern rulebook never reached this place. And that's where things get interesting, because this is the moment where Loving County stops being remote and starts becoming one of the rare counties that remained untouched by the regulatory wave. There's no building department because the county never had the volume, the demand, or the administrative structure to justify creating one. There's no zoning grid because the land was never divided into categories. And there's no residential code adoption because no agency was ever formed to implement or enforce anything. In practice, the regulatory footprint that controls most of America simply never arrived. To understand how unusual that is, compare it with a normal county. In most places, placing a small cabin triggers a $300 zoning review, a $500 foundation plan check, a structural inspection schedule that can reach $1,200, and a permit package that often costs more than the lumber. In most counties, you pay thousands before you even start. In Loving County, you pay zero. Not reduced, not discounted, just zero, because there's nothing to pay for. But what about tomorrow? Could regulations suddenly arrive here? The answer is what makes this county even more surprising. It doesn't just lack regulation, it has no reason to create any. Loving County's budget doesn't depend on homeowners, it runs on oil and gas revenue. That's why the county can keep taxes low without ever being forced to create new departments, hire inspectors, or import modern regulations. When other rural counties face financial pressure and respond by tightening codes, adding fees, or expanding oversight, Loving County does nothing because it doesn't have to. The revenue system already works without regulating private landowners. So, what's the catch? If Loving County passed all the filters, why isn't everyone already trying to move here? Because land availability is extremely limited. Listings appear rarely, sometimes not even once in a decade, and most acreage has been held by the same ranching and oil families for generations. If something hits the market, it's an exception, not the rule. The result is simple. In Loving County, what you build is your decision. The tax bill stays smaller than a phone plan, and the land remains in the hands of the people who own it. Not a department, not a grid, not a process. But there is one catch. Land here is incredibly hard to get. Listings appear rarely, sometimes not even once in a decade, meaning the freedom here is real, but it isn't for everyone. And if Loving is freedom you can't easily buy, the next county is the version you can, a place where the land is open, the rules are thin, and availability isn't the deal breaker. The second county that survived all the filters doesn't sit in Texas, and it doesn't hide behind oil revenue or an empty rulebook. It sits in northeast New Mexico, in a stretch of land that looks more like the backdrop of an old western than a place where people still live, and the name is Hardin County. If Loving County feels like a place the rulebook never reached, Hardin feels like a place the rulebook couldn't keep up with. It covers more than 2,000 square miles, yet barely 450 people live there, which means you could take every resident, put them inside a single high school gym, and still have empty seats. And that's the first clue. The land is so large and so sparsely populated that any attempt at dense regulation collapses under simple math. There isn't enough population, infrastructure, or administrative demand to enforce anything beyond the basics. Harding County technically has zoning, but only on paper. In practice, the map is so open and the parcel so huge that zoning categories barely matter. Most of the land sits under rural open use, a classification so broad it might as well say, do what you need to do. And unlike suburban counties where inspectors patrol subdivisions like a routine, here the distances are so vast that enforcement becomes physically impossible. You're not dodging inspectors. Inspectors would need an hour just to find your driveway. Building codes are also adopted only in partial form, and mostly for public structures. For private landowners, the reality is simple. If your structure isn't commercial, and you're not building inside the tiny municipal edges, you won't meet a permit trail. In most cases, you won't meet an inspector at all. Not because the county is ignoring you, but because the vastness makes strict enforcement impractical. Regulation didn't disappear here, it just never scaled to the size of the land. And the property taxes are one of the biggest surprises. In most rural counties across America, the average homeowner pays between $1,800 and $2,500 a year. In Harding County, that number often sits between $300 and $600, and there are ranch parcels that fall below $300. That's not a typo, that's a tax bill smaller than a cheap Android phone. And when your yearly property tax is the price of a grocery run, you begin to understand why this county made the cut. So why does Harding County stay this way? Because its economy runs on a mix of ranching, agriculture, and legacy landowners, systems that don't require constant construction, dense permitting, or bureaucratic expansion. The land is open, the population is tiny, and the laws that exist function exactly as they intended, lightly. The result is a place where land use is still determined by people, not departments. A place where distance, scale, and low population work in your favor, and a place where the rulebook may exist on paper, but the land writes its own version.
If the first county tested how far the rulebook can shrink, and the second showed what happens when population density falls off a cliff, the third county brings something different, a kind of freedom you can sign your way into. Because unlike Loving, where the hardest part is finding land, and unlike Harding, where distance acts as the real regulator, Cochise County offers something almost nobody expects in modern America, a legal door that lets you step outside the system on purpose. No guessing, no loopholes, no hoping an inspector forgets your address. Just one signature and the entire rulebook stops applying to you. That place is Cochise County, Arizona, the only county in America with an official mechanism called the Owner-Builder Opt-out, a document that does exactly what it sounds like. If your land meets the acreage requirements and you agree to take responsibility for your own structure, the county withdraws its inspectors, its plan reviews, its codes, and its enforcement. It's not an oversight. It's not a gray area. It's the law. Cochise County sits in the high desert of southeast Arizona, covering thousands of square miles, where old mining towns fade into ranch land, and the population spreads thin across the basin. And in this entire area, the opt-out exists for one reason. The county recognized that rural builders wanted flexibility, and instead of fighting it, they legalized it. You still need a septic permit, because groundwater protection is handled at the state level. But the structure itself, the cabin, the workshop, the off-grid home, becomes entirely your decision. No framing inspections, no plan reviews, no residential codes, no structural certifications. In the rest of America, removing inspections is unthinkable. Here, it's a checkbox. And the tax situation reinforces the whole picture. In most Arizona counties, rural parcels still carry property taxes between $1,200 and $2,000 a year, depending on acreage. But in Cochise, many off-grid parcels sit between $350 and $700, especially in the unincorporated stretches where the opt-out applies. When a county collects less and regulates less and still functions, that tells you exactly how the system was designed. The landscape fits the freedom too. Large parcels, minimal density, and a culture built around ranching and self-reliance. This isn't suburban Arizona. This is the part of the state where people build because they can, not because they were granted permission. But there is one condition. The opt-out only applies to rural parcels of at least 4 acres, and the county requires the owner to acknowledge in writing that the structure is built outside of code standards. It's a legal handshake. We won't inspect it, but you accept full responsibility for your own decisions.
If Cochise County proved that freedom can be written into the law with a single signature, the 4th county proves something even stranger, that you don't need deserts or distance to escape the modern rulebook. You just need a place where the system never finished expanding. To find it, you leave the dry Southwest behind and move into a part of America people never expect on a list like this: deep forests, rolling hills, real water, and a legal structure that feels like someone forgot to tighten the screws. This is Miller County, Missouri, a county where the rules don't bend or disappear. They simply were never built in the first place. Here's the foundation. Missouri has no statewide residential building code. None. The state pushed the responsibility down to the local level, and when that moment came, Miller County made a decision that shaped everything. They chose not to adopt any county-wide residential codes at all. No zoning map across the rural expanse, no building code enforcement outside the small incorporated towns, no permit trail for a cabin, a workshop, or a tiny home on your acreage. In most of America, a shipping container home triggers thousands of dollars in engineering stamps and code compliance. In Miller County, outside city limits, you drop it on your land and get to work. Simple as that. And unlike the desert counties where water is the real obstacle, the Ozarks come with the opposite situation: abundance. Springs, creeks, ponds, and a climate that makes rain catchment not a gamble, but a guarantee. What kills your project here isn't drought, it's humidity. But the freedom isn't uniform. The Lake of the Ozarks area is a different world entirely. Dense tourism, HOAs, and shoreline regulations that will suffocate an off-grid build before it even begins. Real freedom lives deeper in the hills, past the paved roads, where the land opens up and the rules thin out to almost nothing. Miller County isn't unregulated because it's remote. It's unregulated because the county never saw a reason to import the suburban rulebook. The land is rural, the community self-sufficient, and the incentive to expand government oversight simply never existed. The result is a rare combination: forest instead of desert, water instead of scarcity, and a legal landscape where building your own place still belongs to the person who owns the land, not to a department, not to a code book, and not to a permit office. If the 4th county proved that freedom can exist in forests just as easily as in deserts, the final county on this list pushes the idea to its limit, a place so large, so empty, and so lightly governed that the modern rulebook barely knows it exists. Hudspeth County, Texas, a county where the map stretches farther than the eye can track, where the nearest neighbor might be a mile away, and where the concept of regulation collapses under the weight of sheer geography. Hudspeth covers more than 4,500 square miles, larger than the entire state of Connecticut, yet fewer than 4,000 people live here. That's a population density so low, it changes everything. You can drive for an hour and see more cattle than humans, and that simple math is what determines the law. There aren't enough people, projects, or inspectors to build a suburban rulebook. There is no countywide zoning, no residential building code adoption, No dense permit apparatus waiting to review your plans. In the vast unincorporated stretches, which is nearly the entire county, the rules are simple. What you place on your land is your decision. And unlike Loving County, where land is almost impossible to find, Hudspeth is the opposite. Inventory exists, and it's some of the cheapest acreage in the entire Southwest. In many sections, you can buy 10 or 20 acres for the price of a used car. The barrier isn't paperwork, it's whether you're comfortable with true remoteness. Because here's the trade: freedom is available, land is available, but services are not. Call 911 from the wrong road, and the sheriff may take an hour to reach you, not because they don't care, but because the distances are unforgiving. Water isn't impossible, but drilling a well can mean going deep or hauling your supply. Roads exist, but they're not always kind. This is the frontier version of freedom: wide open, lightly governed, and entirely dependent on your ability to manage what you own. Property taxes reinforce the pattern. While Texas overall has high taxation, Hudspeth's rural parcels often sit at a fraction of the statewide average, hundreds instead of thousands, because the county budget is built around minimal services and minimal intervention. There's no incentive to create new departments or import complex regulations. The system works because it remains simple. Hudspeth County closes the list for a reason. It isn't exclusive like Loving. It isn't shaped by distance like Harding. It isn't legally optional like Cochise, and it isn't forest freedom like Miller. Hudspeth is something else entirely. The proof that in the far edges of the country, freedom survives not as a loophole or an accident, but as geography. A final reminder that the government didn't forget these places. It just never fully arrived. And none of them fit the version of America most people think they live in. They're not connected by geography or climate or politics. They're connected by the gaps, the places where the rulebook never fully took hold. And that's the part nobody really talks about. Because if these counties still exist, untouched, unscaled, and almost invisible, then the real question isn't where the government never reached. It's how many more places like these might still be hiding in a country this size. If you want us to keep digging, to open the map again and search for the next strange corner, tell me in the comments. The next one might be even stranger.